So let's begin by just examining the big picture question, which is, does the brain control behavior? And my hope is that everyone is immediately thinking yes. The brain and nervous system, we really should say, because the brain is just one component of the nervous system, controls our behavior. How does it do that? Well, there are a couple different levels that it does that. First of all, if we're talking about movement, behavior generally means movement. If we're talking about movement, we have two categories of neurons that are very important to think about in the context of neuroplasticity. First of all, we have what are called lower motor neurons. These are motor neurons that live in our spinal cord. If for the aficionados out there, for those of you that might be head to medical school or just want to learn more about the anatomy, they live in the ventral horn of the spinal cord, but that doesn't matter. If you don't want to know that, just know that you have these things called lower motor neurons. These are neurons that are in the spinal cord, but they extend a wire that we call an axon out into the peripheral nervous system, into the body, and those neurons connect with muscle. They send electrical potentials out there that allow our muscles to twitch and to contract. As a little point of fact, actually, we don't have muscle memory. There's no such thing as muscle memory. Muscles are dumb. They don't know anything. They don't have a history. They don't have a memory. They don't know anything. It is the neurons that control those muscles and their firing patterns in which all the information for motor patterns are stored. So your ability to walk is not muscle memory, it's neural memory. Now the lower motor neurons, while smarter than the muscle, so to speak, are not the most brilliant of the motor neurons. They are generally involved in doing what they are told. And they are told what to do from two sources. We have circuits in our brainstem, so this would be kind of around your neck, deep in the brain, that are called central pattern generators. These are sometimes called CPGs. Central pattern generators are what allow us to generate repetitive patterns of movement. So inhaling and exhaling subconsciously is controlled by a central pattern generator. That just means a collection of neurons. If you really want to know, they're called the Prebot-Singer neurons, discovered by Jack Feldman and colleagues at UCLA. These neurons in the brainstem send information down the phrenic nerve and control the diaphragm, so it goes inhale, exhale, and you don't have to think about that. You could think about it, and you could change the durations of inhales and exhales and change that up, but the motor neurons that control that are just responding to what the brain is telling it to do. The other central pattern generators include things like walking. The right limb, left limb pattern that we normally associate with walking was learned during childhood, and these central pattern generators, sometimes called CPGs, tell our lower motor neurons, fire, now you fire, now you fire. So they are literally saying right, left. They are the marching orders from the brainstem to the lower motor neurons. So these lower motor neurons do what they are told. They are obedient little soldiers, and they do what they are told, and their job is to make the muscles contract at specific times. Okay, that's all simple. But then there are the upper motor neurons. The upper motor neurons actually reside in our motor cortex, way up on top of the brain. And they are involved in sending signals for deliberate action. Okay, so they send signals to the lower motor neurons, which are the effectors, the ones that actually control the muscles, but the upper motor neurons are the ones that send very specific signals. For instance, the signals that would allow you to make a cup of coffee in the morning or to deliberately engage in any kind of behavior. Now, you can probably make a cup of coffee in the morning without having to think about it too much. It's almost reflexive for you now, which means that a lot of the information about how to perform that particular movement has been passed off to circuitry that's now more or less in the brainstem and below the motor cortex. Now, why am I giving you all this detail? Well, if you want to change motor patterns, you have to know where in the circuitry changes are possible, and you ought to know where the changes are most likely to occur. You also need to know how do you signal to the brain and nervous system that a change is necessary. So let's just pause there, return to the initial question that we started with, which is, does the brain control behavior? And the answer is yes, and now you know how. It's upper motor neurons, lower motor neurons. You've got these things called central pattern generators and some connection with the muscle. So there you go. You just got basically what was the equivalent of the introduction to a college lecture on motor control in the nervous system. But the point today is all about plasticity. How can that be leveraged in order to open up this magical thing that we call plasticity in order to access changes to our emotional experience or to our belief system or to our ability to remember and use specific kinds of information for, say, math or language, etc. Well, what I'm not going to tell you is that you need to go running or you need to go biking or that simply going through motor patterns is going to open up plasticity, because I hate to tell you this, but as beneficial as exercise is, it does not open plasticity unless you do certain things. And I will tell you exactly what those certain things are today. To be clear, I think exercise is wonderful and healthy, can improve cardiovascular function, maintain strength, bone density, all that good stuff. But just working out or doing your exercise of various kinds will not change your nervous system. It will maintain it, and it can certainly improve other health metrics, but it is not going to open up the window for plasticity. The question we need to ask is, can behavior change the brain? We already agreed that the brain can change behavior, but can behavior change the brain? And the answer is yes, provided that behavior is different enough in specific ways from the behaviors that you already know how to perform. Let me repeat that. Can behavior change the brain? And the answer is yes, provided that behavior is different enough from the sorts of behaviors that you already know how to perform. And I should have added the word well, because you can't obviously perform a behavior that you don't know how to perform because you don't know how to do it yet. But there's a key element to accessing neuroplasticity that, frankly, I don't see out there in the general discussion about neuroplasticity. In the general discussion about neuroplasticity and about learning, I hear all these gimmicks about using different ways to remember lots of people's names and arranging things into their first letters and mnemonics and all this kind of stuff, which frankly to me feels really gimmicky. And I think that if you look at super learners, they tend to be people that have a process of, say, extreme memory. But people who have extreme memory generally, the literature shows us, are pretty poor at other things. So I don't think most of us are interested in walking around knowing how to remember everything. In fact, there are some interesting studies looking at humans who over-remember, and they suffer tremendously because they remember all sorts of things, like the number at the top of the receipt at the bodega that they bought a Coca-Cola 10 years ago. This is useless information for most people. They don't do well in life, really. So the goal isn't to remember everything. The goal is to be selective about your brain changes. And when we talk about brain changes, I want to highlight adaptive changes. There's a whole category of things that we're going to discuss when we talk about traumatic brain injury and dementia, a topic for a future episode, about all the things that happen when you have damage to your nervous system or you're missing neurons. But today, I really want to talk about something that I think is very near and dear to many of your hearts, which is, what are the behaviors that you can engage in to access neuroplasticity so that then you can apply that plasticity to the specific things that you want to learn or unlearn. This is very important because I don't want people to get the impression that we're really talking about learning a bunch of motor movements. You may be an athlete, you might not be an athlete. You might want to learn how to dance, you might not. You might want to learn how to dance and get better at remembering and learning languages, for instance, or at unlearning some difficult emotional experience, meaning you want to remove the emotional load from a particular memory of an experience. What we're talking about today is using behavior as a gate to enter states of mind and body that allow you to access plasticity.